Thanks for joining us. And in this 30 minutes, we're going to have hopefully a whirlwind tour of unpacking what it takes to sell a construction business. Could be a trades business. And I have on with me Mark Rice, who is truly an ace lawyer. And I've had a really great experience with working with him for a couple deals. And it really makes a gigantic difference when you have people that are in part of a transaction that are deal makers, and rather than just people that are protecting your behind. So I'm Kris Moe. I work with a firm called M&A Business Advisors. And this year, we'll probably do $100 million in business sales. And we do manufacturing businesses. But we do a lot of construction. I feel very comfortable in construction, and Mark and I agree. Construction it's fun to work with people that are actually making things. And I'm going to hand it off to you, Mark. Just introduce yourself really fast.
Yeah, thank you, Kris. And I echo Kris's comments. You know, construction is a people business. It's a trust business. It's a handshake business. And it's always important to know that many leaders and CEOs and presidents of construction companies who are looking to sell started out in the trenches as a laborer and worked their way up. And that affects how they want to interact with their professionals like Kris. And I enjoy working with Kris because he makes it personal, and it is kind of a marriage to sell a business. It's about a 3-year marriage, and then there's not a divorce at the end, but there's a transition where the buyer takes over. And so managing folks through that is a really important process. Kris's team does it really well, and I'm always look forward to working with him. So with that, let's hit the slides. We got a half an hour. It's going to be short.
Exactly.
And
let's get
we're
into
going to
it.
keep on time.
Okay, so and people are going to come in. Oh, we got a few more coming in here, so maybe I'll just talk a little slower. So in this 30 minutes, we're going to kind of give the big picture of kind of the steps, and Mark is going to help chime in with some of the areas of his expertise, which is kind of on the legal side and really negotiation and all this other things. But the first thing when somebody calls me or expresses some interest in I have a business and I'd like to exit out at some point, whether it's in 10 years, and I want to talk to them or at least get to know their business a little bit and let them know how sellable their business is. And that starts with profitability, and there's other intangibles and tangibles that people are looking for. But for construction, right off the bat, it's got to have a really good reputation. It's got to have a really good organization of people who are getting the jobs done and equipment and all these things. So, and the profitability, the more profitable you are, the larger if you're doing, say, 5 million in profit, you're probably going to be doing 5 times that in for what your sales price is going to. You might get $25 million, and that's kind of what we're fishing around for, is to possibly advise the person on certain things they can do to their business to get a higher valuation. So I'm just going to dive right into what that is after I've built a relationship with that owner where they are comfortable enough to share their financials with me, I'm going to crunch it down to numbers where investors or buyers. So we're going to try to find all the money from, maybe there's been some personal expenses run through the business, all those, and depreciation, all these other things that are going to give us that nice bottom line number. And that's going to take us to a place where we're going to have all these comps. And in this particular case, I have basically a $20 million revenue company. I put in the parameters of 10 to 30, just to show you. In this case, I got back 39 comparables. And this is what's going to help us create the range. And you can see the range for this particular business is as low as 1 times profits all the way up to 5.41 profits. And so The earlier I get to see this in a business, I might be able to help them with some advice to, for instance, maybe not have so much customer concentration in that business. And I'm going to let Mark here chime in a second on some of these other things. And I'll just jump right to the slide right here. I'm going to pass it on to you, Mark, and just share a couple of things that are some of the things I might not see.
Well, just on this point of profitability, I sit in some corporate board meetings annually where we go over their balance sheet, and often what entices the estimator, the big jobs, but then every year we look at it and it's the smaller jobs, the $500,000 or less jobs that have the most profit. You're in, you're out. It's the long jobs, San Francisco airport, things that you don't seem to be get out, and all of a sudden your estimating goes out the window. What I want to talk about here is very specific to construction, which is contractors often have off balance sheet assets that are the true drivers of their business, and ultimately for a sophisticated savvy buyer who knows construction are the drivers of the deal. And you as a seller and you as a buyer should know what's the driver of the deal. Why this company over all the other pretty pennies? Okay, and I'll give you just two examples. One, and this is one that we just finished. It was involving a foundation company that had a really low modification rate with the workers' compensation rating, like 0.59. Well, what that is, it's paying 41% less workers' comp insurance annually than all its competition or the average. So that's a profit center, number one. But in this case, it had an extra kicker, and the extra kicker was they had an annuity relationship with the Contra Costa, Richmond, Martinez refineries. And to work on those refineries, you have to have an impeccable safety record. One accident, one broken toenail, you're done. And so they became the envy of other contractors to buy them to acquire that access, that annuity relationship, because you couldn't get in anyway. They had a kind of almost a monopoly. And in fact, so the purchase was a stock purchase, not an asset purchase. Why? Because the buyer wanted to keep the same trucks, the same colors, the same logo, the same insurance broker. Everything remained same bat channel, because that was the driver of the deal, along with the retirement age of the seller. Second, I'll give another example. One, we had a client many years ago who another foundation got through. It was patents. It was patents and alternative technology and a specific crew. The crew wasn't necessarily going to receive stock, but the target was this crew, this equipment, specialized equipment, so that the buyer could then provide alternatives in the market to different ways to do foundations. So know that. And so I just listed some of these as examples. Other thing that's has to be explained is sometimes construction companies have a claim, which takes maybe 6 months to as much as 2 years to resolve. In the meantime, you have cost. And so your job profit might look low, but in fact, it's something that's just, cultivating over time like a good wine. You just have to harvest it a little slower. So those are things that contractors can work to explain, but also know when they're trying to sell.
Thanks, Mark. And that's where your experience with working these companies, and my experience is finding those little things can really make a deal and help us find the buyer and help the deal get through. I'm going to move on to this next slide, which is just about preparing for you're getting an offer and how to kind of hit the ground running so we can keep the deal going through. And frankly, that's a big part of what I'm doing in this deal is I'm kind of coordinating the lawyers and the CPAs and trying to keep a momentum going when we get out of the gates. And it's a lot of communication and trying to sometimes filter some emotions because it can get emotional. But so even before we put the business on the market, I want to see how ready they might be for due diligence, because eventually we're going to have to start loading a lot of things into a data vault. Buyers are usually professional level buyers, private equities. They usually run the deal from their side, and they might be buying 5 or 10 businesses a year, and it's an operation. And so if you can continually respond to what they're looking for, we can keep that momentum going through. So Mark, wouldn't you agree in this early stage, even on the legal side, I'm kind of trying to use my cursor to show, find issues and fix them.
Yeah, and there are folks, and including Kris and often your CPA, that can look at your balance sheet this year and apply those formulas that Kris showed earlier and say, is any one of them kind of showing a funny look? And it might have nothing to do with anything but some attention to detail. And then frankly, in the last few years with the PPP money, many contractors cleaned up old dead inventory because they had a little bit of extra dough to make their balance sheet look tighter. So that sometimes takes a couple cycles. So this is an area where you, as a seller, want to be ready early, because that's going to be in effect a test drive. The buyer's going to test drive you. How quickly can you and your team turn around documents? Are you battle ready, if you will, for a due diligence process?
Let's move on to the next one. This is going to be on tax, which you can say is part of that. Are you ready? Is talking to somebody who's a specialist in, hey, I'm selling my business for X. What's going to be my best strategy so I get to keep more of that money? And again, part of my job, aside from kind of moving the deal along, is also when I see there's some players who aren't on the field that could help as part of the team, I'm going to refer, like I sometimes refer, folks to Mark and other lawyers that might be, specialists in certain area, as well as the tax strategy side. And Mark, you must have, you give us something from your side, because your firm has had a lot of experience with I know at least referring, but probably been at it long enough to probably have some pretty good best practices.
Well, one of the first things we do is we engage, by telephone or Zoom or face-to-face with the corporate CPA, and we make 2 evaluations. Is this person just, being counting? Are they really going to be dynamic enough for this process? And then 2, both with a CPA and in-house, we do a tax pro forma analysis. Look at the structures of subchapter S, subchapter C, LLC organization, how many assets are in the construction company itself. Sometimes folks have a separate equipment company, sometimes they have land. So we know what our tax outcomes are before we start negotiating price. And that sometimes it results in somebody selling the land and not the business, and all sorts of things happen. But you don't want the sticker shock on the tax to come late. You want it to be known before you sign the letter of intent. And we're lucky we have folks here that are tax planners. I wouldn't say that that's my first thing I do, but I engage the whole team and we run through the numbers.
I think that's again where the experience comes in. When you've seen dozens of deals over the years, even though you might not be a tax accountant, you got some good ideas that you can bring in, and we try to do the same. But when it comes down to brass tacks, when it comes to the legal side, I'm going to you or another really good lawyer that is comfortable in doing transactions, especially in a certain industry. So let's go to the next part, which is, let's say we've got the deal where the seller is like, okay, that price range that you came up with seems reasonable to me. That's going to help me get to my goals, whether it's retirement or whatever they're doing. And we're going to package up a summary of their business. And we're trying to anticipate everything that a buyer is going to look for. And it's not that magical. We kind of have a Q&A that we do with the seller, and then we pour them in and make it look really pretty with pictures and everything in the financials. And that is a huge part, is that really nice SIM, or confidential information memorandum, and then having a good sense of who those buyers might be. There's strategic buyers and there's private equity buyers. And that's kind of where we're kind of like hunters going out saying, okay, I like this business, this concrete business, whatever kind of business, we kind of have an idea already who the buyers are going to be for that type of business. So the packaging is really important, and that's hopefully going to lead us into due diligence. Everything we've put into that sim is representations of what this business is all about. And then we have to go about, in due diligence, the buyer's going to verify everything in that. So that's going to be the legal side. That's going to be the financials.
Work
I'd
with
love to hear what you guys say about that, Mark.
Why? I saw it in the.
Hey, Clifford, hey, Mr. Waldeck, you're on. You're not on mute.
Yeah, I went.
I'm trying to mute him. I'm not. Oh, there we go. Okay. So in due diligence, I know we're very engaged. Usually these buyers give us a list of what they're looking for, kind of where the lawyer might come in, and where we're going to come in is like, wait a second, you're asking for way too much. But it's usually pretty reasonable, but some deals it's not that reasonable, and we kind of have to help them edit it down. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, I would say that never overreact to the first document. And by that, I mean, don't write back right away if it's not exactly what you want. Use the phone to engage in what their perspective is, because that will help build a relationship before you respond. Because a lot of good deals can easily get sidetracked by what I would call the opaqueness of emails. We use emails to communicate, but they're not very well-rounded, and they often get misinterpreted. So I really encourage, if you get something you don't like, make it easy. Now, a lot of people in the construction, folks that are near retirement, they're often reaching out. Sellers are reaching out. These are deals that don't necessarily go through brokers initially. They're reaching out to people they've known in the industry for 20, 30, 40 years. That handshake deal is done before I see a paper. I get the old official napkin. It's already signed. Now, what do we turn it into? Okay. So you just need to know the personalities and the business style. Some people don't like it to be too papered up. Other people want it very, very tightly wound. So those are my comments, Kris.
I love that. Wait, let's go just to show a sample of, this is just a snippet of a part of a due diligence list. And this could be 100 different items. And so typically in the process, we have an assistant who's receiving those in a vault room and then crossing them off or putting in not applicable. So it's anyway, it's just kind of good to see that. And I'm going to move on to this next slide, which is addressing more of the RMO side, another one of the nuances of the construction side of a deal.
Yeah, and this has to do with the sleepless night part of being a contractor, a stand-up contractor who's been getting up, he and his spouse at 4 a.m, for 30, 40 years to make sure everybody's safe, to make sure the job's done, their reputation's protected, the work is sound. Part of that is the buyer is often going to want to have the seller, the responsible managing officer, whoever is viewed by the license board as the key job manager, to stay on. And often that's going to be the CEO, not always. And it takes, sometimes 30, 60, 90 days to get a new RMO in there. Buyers sometimes want their own person. But you really have to be careful. You can't just have a consultancy if you're going to continue to rely on the existing RMO, the selling shareholder. He has to remain an employee, a wage earner. And this just came out on one over the East Bay that Kris and I worked on, where the traditional view is we're going to make the person a consultant because then they can expense their travel and their everything. And no, we can't do it. We have to have an employment agreement. We have to add some perks to it while the buyer's getting their license status. Otherwise, you get challenged on whether or not you're truly licensed if nobody's really home as the RMO. So it's just an extra special area of consideration, I'd say. In a construction deal, you're going to want to have a licensed specialist, and it could be an expediter, it could be a construction lawyer, but most corporate lawyers only are not going to see this as easily.
I think this next slide goes right into your wheelhouse as well. So we're typically getting an LOI, sometimes an IOI, and that's where we need the lawyers involved. And it's Mark, you want to elaborate on?
Yeah. I had a friend of mine who had it was a cancer research business, one of the medicals, and he has a deal fall through. And I said, why did it fall through? He says, we made a mistake. We controlled the document. He was the seller. And it took me a while to understand what he was saying, but usually the buyer's lawyer, just like in real estate, where the buyer makes the first offer, the owner of the property makes the counter. It's the same in these transactions. Not always. I've done it the reverse when it made sense. But usually the buyer does the definitive agreement. One is it's their expense, their lawyer. The seller is still acting sort of, if you will, in the hard to get position. But it's one of the few opportunities a seller can understand the buyer's point of view, indirect due diligence by what the buyer puts together in the agreement, how it's packaged, all the schedules and attachments. The other reason is you avoid or reduce the risk that the buyer is going to constantly ask little detail changes, and it might be just because they're waiting on financing or waiting on a junior investor. They won't tell you that. You want to be the one making the changes and deciding the tempo of the red lines, I call them. So that's a key point, and it's very fast. You have to make sure that you're there literally on task, daily, because once these things go, no matter how big or small they go quickly. I mean, you can look at Twitter, and Elon Musk is an example of how things went fast and blew up fast. So the employment agreements, the consulting agreements, the non-compete agreements, and it's also your last opportunity to have a look-see and say, I think we need to change the deal structure from stock to asset and make an adjustment of price. It's just an opportunity to make sure your client knows what they're going to be paying to Uncle Sam. Okay, Kris.
That's great. And so this leads us to, hey, it's closed. Everybody's having a party. Things are great, but it's not completely over, because that leads us into some of the strings that are not quite, they're still kind of hanging out there, and the adjustments and things are going to be made with inventory after the deal close. And I'd like to pass it on to you again on this part as well.
This is the way I want to talk about this, is really from the very, very personal. In the last two deals that Kris and I worked on, we had sellers that really built their businesses up from scratch. They didn't inherit it from family, or they weren't second generation, and they were nervous Nellies, and there was success. That's why buyers liked them. But they just couldn't really grasp the fact that you don't get a free lunch when it comes to representations, warranties, indemnifications. And the question is, how much will the buyer stand behind the used car as is sale, if you will? It is an as is sale, subject to honest disclosures, and then sometimes you cap the amount. This one we have right now is an environmental risk. Okay, what's the environmental risk of the property, of the type of materials, the class action suits involving the nail guns they use, all sorts of things that you go through one by one, and then you actually talk to the other attorney about those same issues, because by being transparent about risk assessment, you really look at the same thing. And they often will say, the buyer's attorney, well, right now you have 100% risk, right, as the owner, and we're reducing your risk. We can't take it all your risk, because we're talking about risks of jobs that were already completed, but there's about a 10-year tail in California called latent deficiencies, and something can pop up. And so we spend, both Kris and I, and this is where I think a lawyer can help, is those confidential communications, where I'm walking the client through and saying, this is normal. We're getting a really good limitation, or they're pushing hard, or how to tweak it, especially when you're having somebody that, has held on to the risk as their prime way they've managed their jobs. They want to have the ability to sleep, not worry, and yet their personality, what made them successful, makes them worry. So it's not that it's psychological, but it is knowing what exactly is driving the client, because then you can begin to finesse the terms to fit, their risk module. And most of the time we have one that we just finished, East Bay guy, and the way he's going to deal with risk is he's going to be out there every other week for 6 months teaching the new guy who already has an engineering degree and license to the business, because for him it's almost a father-son mentorship. He didn't have a son, he had a daughter, still works for the business. So for him it's really important that all of his know-how, none of it's on paper, gets transferred. He wants this legacy, and often that's important too, to not underestimate how much a seller wants this to be a flagship, not like Patagonia giving its business away to the world, but kind of the same mindset.
It's fascinating. What I've found with construction is those reps and warranties can be a pickle, but ideally it's another construction company or an investment company that has a lot of those types of businesses and understand there's going to be some risk involved, and they have to come to terms. And that's where your expertise has been awesome in the deals we've been involved with. So if anybody had any questions, you can put them through the chat right now, because we're coming to the end, or feel free.
They can just ask now that we're.
Yeah, they can actually. And here's our contact information, obviously. And I know Mark would welcome would offer a free consultation if you'd like to talk about your business, and I would as well. And so the door is open.
Let me add one more thing, just as I was thinking about this, is there's something that there's probably a better way to put it, but they were calling it the Silver Tsunami, which is many construction companies in the last 10 or 15 years, you have senior management, senior ownership, and unless they have a succession plan where there's a second in command that's capitalized and ready to take on the reins and has financial backing, either with an SBA loan or family members or his own capital or her capital, they are going to sometimes need time to find the right buyer, because that buyer has to, unless it's somebody in the league where you're really looking at a bigger business, fit is important, and it takes a while to find that fit. So if you're thinking about getting to that place, it really behooves to get going early and market and let folks quietly know you're selling, or hire somebody like Kris to do that for you.
That's great. Thanks, Mark. So I don't see any questions here at this point. So I'm going to say thanks everybody for getting on the call. And I'm kind of going to pat us both on the back, so we kept it under 30 minutes, which was, I know there's so much information. We could have gone into a few rabbit holes.
We got a nice comment from Mr. Waldeck. Avoid the opaqueness of emails. In my litigation side, I call emails the lawyer's full employment act, because I haven't found one that was fully understood yet. They'd be like taffy in court to see people argue about what it meant. It's kind of a fascinating business. So I think in deals, it's a good practice. If you send an email, minimize information unless you're really trying to take a stand, and then make a phone call and follow up so your voice is connected to your email and it softens the edges. Just my opinion.
Well, as you said, this is a people business, not just doing deals, but construction. And it's been a joy to work with you and get to know you a little bit more. And thanks again for getting on the call.
Yeah, I want to say one last thing is both Kris and I are members of the Builders Exchange, and I really, we both attended their golf tournament. Kris is a former professional golfer. We really applaud this platform. So often it's just mechanics, liens, and collections and insurance. So it's a nice opportunity to talk to you, and thank you. We're gonna call it a day, 30 minutes exact. Bye all.